Welcome back to Rhetoric Warriors, the podcast. We are teaching America to persuade because America doesn't know. It's complicated times, and we've got, uncomplicated techniques that we keep throwing at each other, and they keep bouncing off people's faces like ping pong balls. Uh, Find us on social media, Rhetoric Warriors. You can find us at Twitter, Instagram, website. Pop by our website, take our one-year course in Master Course in Persuasion. This is all about recovering lost people. If you've lost people to certain worldviews, if you want to ramp up your marketing or your sales for your business and really get the non-crazy people elected again, would be nice. So there's a certain agenda here, but really it's about learning how to persuade in ethical only ways, which we will talk about. I am Dr. Dan French, rhetoric PhD, escaped professor, also stand-up comedian, comedy writer from late night in Hollywood. I'm out here to give people some tools, maybe something that they haven't heard quite yet via this crazy world of digital distribution. The podcast does three things. I convert right-wingers. That's not going to be this week. I will do another right-winger here soon. I have quite a few in the queue. There's lots of them out there. I also talk to comedians about their politics and how their crazy brains filter all this stuff, this persuasion stuff. And I find persuasion pros, just smart people, to tell us what they think about all this process of magically taking people from where they are to where you want them to be. So that's the setup. This week is, I'd say, category 3. This is a smart friend of mine that I just love talking to and always have. So he's one of my favorite people, Harry Max. I describe Harry Max as the universal VP. He's the VP of all things. And that's the only introduction I'm going to give you. He'll tell you more. Everybody, welcome from California, Harry Max. Harry?
Great to be here, Dan. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to folks who you are speaking to. Any friend of yours is a friend of mine.
Yeah, I hope, there's some friends out there amidst the people. There's some friends, there's some neutrals, and of course there should be enemies anytime you take positions on things, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the most interesting things over the last few years popped up recently when somebody said, what positive thing did 2020 bring you? And I was scratching my head and I thought, well, I like staying at home. I get to do a lot of that. And well, but what really positive thing came out of 2020? And I thought, well, actually, it's, I think for the first time in my life, being able to see from a diametrically opposed point of view and recognizing that each of these point of views is right from that point of view. And I think my point of view was right before, but now I realize that my point of view is just a point of view.
Well, tell me what that means, because we're going to have to dive into that. Philosophically, I disagree with the foundational premise, but I also totally understand why people agree with the foundational premise of it's just my perspective. It's just my point of view.
Sure. Well, I mean,
like, what does that apply to when you think about what are you talking about?
What I'm talking about relates to the book I'm writing on prioritization. I'm writing a book on prioritization for business. It's priorities beyond getting stuff done. And it's really for business, and it's for people in business who want to do better work themselves, and people who want to be and participate on teams in a more effective way, and people who want to work in organizations in a more effective way and understand all of what's going on. So somebody, relatively new to the world of work, sitting around thinking to themselves, gosh, I wonder how this all functions. And my thesis is that, pretty much everything is a prioritization problem or a prioritization opportunity. And, fundamentally, it boils down to what matters. It either matters to you explicitly and consciously, or it matters to you implicitly or tacitly or unconsciously. But either way, it's going to affect the decisions you make and the actions you take. And so I was trying to wrap my head around how it is that prioritization is the fundamental mechanic behind getting to outcomes that are better. And so I've been writing this book now going on, I don't know, 3.5, 4 years, occasionally waking up in the morning and beating my head in the wall and thinking, wow, that hurts. I should
I've
stop
seen some
doing
of
it.
those bruises. I've seen you walk out of rooms with bruises and like, oh, Harry's
Oh my
working.
God, it's hard. Writing a book is so, I mean, it's not like this is the first book I've ever written, but it's the first book I've written that I've cared about. And it turns out that when you care about something and you want to write a book, it's hard. And so I'm on my fourth full rewrite at this point, and I was working on the chapter for teams. And I was struck with the fact that I noticed that I was describing things for which there was a picture in my head that I had never shared with anybody before. And so I grabbed a small whiteboard, portable whiteboard that I had, and I started drawing this picture out. And I realized that I had been telling pieces of how this whole thing worked, but I'd never described it as a mechanism. And if you want to get to desired outcomes, if you want to see things in the world that are more to your liking, then you have to produce results that are going to tend in the direction of those outcomes, because outcomes aren't necessarily in your control. They're outcomes. It's what happens after they leave your control. You know, if you play on a team, and if you do your best, you know, you might be able to score, but it doesn't mean you're going to win the tournament. Um, there's a lot of stuff that's outside of your control. And so I built this map to try to figure out why priorities matter. And that raised the question of alternative facts. And I,
Alternative
I have,
facts.
yeah, I
Yeah,
have
those two
been,
words. You use those two words usually. They're not supposed to conjoin. They're not supposed to be able to live in the same space.
well, I was trying to understand why that phrase bothered me so much. Because, I mean, it's brilliant. It is a brilliant phrase. It's like, well, gosh, that doesn't explain it. These alternative facts explain it. And I'm thinking, okay, well, if there are facts and alternative facts, how do you know which ones are right? Or how do you know which ones are more useful? And I thought, well, if you put them into the blender of prioritization, you should be able to produce a cake that's more like one you want to eat and less like one you want to throw away. And so, are you going to use alternative facts or are you going to use facts? And I thought, okay, that's interesting. So I thought, okay, if you get to outcomes which are outside of your control through the results that you're producing, and you produce those results by making decisions and taking action, how do you get to decisions and actions that are going to produce results that are more like that are going to be more like the ones you want, and trend in the direction of the outcomes you're looking for? And I thought, oh, you need good options. Oh, well, how do you get good options? How do you get good choices? And I thought, well, one way is to prioritize, right? Take a bunch of stuff and organize it and get rid of the stuff that doesn't matter and percolate up the stuff that matters a lot, and then look at that stuff and then make some choices about what you want out of that. You know, look, if you're going to go get a new job, you you, you know, you're going to take a bunch of jobs, and some of them are going to be kind of Mac jobs, and you're going to think, well, I don't want one of them. And some of them are going to be very highly paid, and you're going to think, well, I want one of them, but I'm not qualified, and I wonder how long I can if I can get hired, and if I do get hired, how long I'll be able to stay there before they figure out I don't know what I'm doing. But the fact is that if you want a bunch of options and you want to make decisions based on those options, you want to choose from the better options, not the worse options, because the decisions that you make are going to affect the action that you take, and the action that you take is going to affect the results that you get, and the results that you get are going to lead you hopefully in the direction of the outcomes that you want. And I thought, well, how do you get there? And I thought, okay, well, that involves the process of prioritizing. That whether you're prioritizing problems or opportunities, you're prioritizing things or products or features or services, or you're prioritizing activities or projects or tasks or your to-dos or processes. It doesn't much matter what you're prioritizing. What matters is that when you get to the point that you realize that you need to prioritize consciously, that you do it in a way that leads you toward getting a set of getting a set of options so that you can make some choices, so that you can get to a point of being able to make a decision, which is separating this from that, to take action that's going to lead you in the direction of getting a result that will hopefully get you toward the outcome you're looking for. And I thought to
let me pull
myself,
you into something here, Harry.
yeah,
Okay, because this is the weird thing about podcasting. Podcasting is dialogic.
yeah,
Like I need to bounce you a little bit. So I'm going to bounce you over into something that I think this is really useful to apply to. So this week, all I always drag things back to politics because in persuasion is such a strong location. But the Democrats, there was a tweet by a guy named Adam Christensen on Twitter, and he basically said that the Democrats right now are losing the PR battle for Georgia because
mhm,
the runoff elections coming up on January 6th, because they have not made a prioritization. There's too many different points being pushed, not being pushed strongly enough. And what he said was that they're losing because they have not come out and said we need $2,000 in stimulus every month for the next 6 months.
mhm,
So he cut through everything and said, here's the priority. I'm going to give you the priority
mhm,
that I think should run the Democrats basically for the next, 2 or 3 weeks.
mhm,
And his claim is that if you follow that priority, that choice, it's going to basically change the, entire trajectory of the country for the next at least 2 years because they'll run the Senate, the House, and the presidency. Now,
mhm,
would you call that like he's giving us the prioritization, right?
mhm. So
So
oh, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, so like when you look at that, one of the things like the Democrats versus the way the Republicans do their persuasion, the Republicans typically prioritize way up high, like in a think tank. Then it comes down through the sort of media system, and it's handed out in the media, so that by the time it gets down to the politicians and then all the people who follow in the Republican Party, they've been given a priority choice from the top down of what to say.
Mhm,
So it is a clear talking point versus the Democrats who are not prioritizing like that at all. It's
mhm,
just this mass of people with no system for
mhm,
prioritizing what to talk about.
mhm.
So when I hear you talking about that, it immediately rifts me over into these two communication approaches.
Exactly. Uh, the thing is that that goes directly to the heart of why this matters, because fundamentally it's about understanding the as is current reality and understanding the to be desired state, and what is the gap between those two things, because that what's in that gap is going to be valued differently by different people. And right now there are a lot of people out of work. Right now there are a lot of people worried about where their Christmas presents are going to come from. Right now there are a lot of people worried about how they're going to pay for healthcare. Right now there are people worried about where whether they're going to be able to visit relatives in the hospital if they happen to get sick. And in some places they're worried about whether they can even get into a hospital if they get sick. But the fact is that this in order to be able to prioritize, you have to have a sense of reality. You have to have clarity about what you want, what is desired, and you have to be able to define what is the problem in between those two things, or what is the opportunity between those two things. And right now there isn't a lot of disagreement, I think, at the level of people need the money. People are hurting because they don't have the money, and people that had the money uh, when they had their jobs are now worried about how they're going to make it through the holiday season and the beginning of next year. And everybody wants the stimulus check. Nobody wants the $855 billion worth of stuff. They want that little bit that's going to translate into a check is going to show up at my post, in my post box, that I can deposit in my bank, that I can pay for my bills. It doesn't matter whether you're a Democrat or whether you're a Republican or whether you're a libertarian or whether you're a Martian, right? The money
So that's a
matters right now.
priority.
It is a priority for, it doesn't matter who you are, the money's a priority. And so the historical machinery around pushing the messaging into the system from the Republican point of view, or from bubbling it up from the Democratic point of view, that matters a lot less to people than, do you understand who I am and what problems that I have, and how we're suffering because of those problems. And that's where this notion of alternative facts come in, because you either have the money or you don't. And the people that are sitting there wondering how they're going to buy their groceries aren't worried about whether that's a real fact or an alternative fact. They're just worried about the fact they don't have the money. And so
that's a hard fact, right?
It's a hard
I
fact.
don't have enough money.
I don't have enough money. And $600, well, $1,200 a couple of months ago and $600 now ain't gonna cut it. So if you want to cut it, start with the reality that is for people, where they are in their world, which is they're worried about how they're going to feed their kids, pay their bills, and get health care. And I don't care whether you're Republican or Democrat or liberal. It doesn't matter. So if you
within
want,
that though, like here's the thing, like I always think about this stuff with yours too. Like I used to describe marketing to people as, think of a wall in your house, a blank wall. And
Mhm.
on that wall, there are like 1,000 light bulbs, tiny light bulbs of different color. And each one of them has a dial underneath it that you can turn or not. So out of those 1,000 things in front of you, those are 1,000 potential things you have to deal with in marketing. Like
Mhm.
little dials you can turn to get that thing, to burn brighter or a different color or whatever it needs in order to get noticed. So
Mhm.
like naming, for example, I've done a lot of naming in businesses.
Mhm.
So if you pick an amazing name or an amazing title of something, it completely changes the entire board, because now that little light burns brighter than anything. And as soon as people see it, they're like, oh, I get it. And
Mhm.
it does all the stuff so about half your bulbs can go away.
Mhm.
But when you look at something like this, like, like you're saying right now, like people have a lot of worries. That's a bunch of different dials up there, a bunch of different bulbs. And like with prioritization, one of the things that I find fascinating about your stuff is, even though you start very intellectual, like it's a very practical, pragmatic outcome if you follow the system of it. You
Mhm.
have to make a decision about which bulb, which dial, because you can't turn them all.
That's right.
You don't have the money, you don't have the expertise, you don't know what half of them are.
Some of them are hot.
Some of them are very hot. So like this, like the tweet and this idea of $2,000 a month. Jimmy Dore, who's also he's a podcaster, he's a comedian turned podcaster, deeply into politics and super progressive. Like he thinks, the Democrats basically are always selling out to the middle and they're never getting anything important done. A couple weeks ago came up with, again, a dial turn, a very specific bulb. And he's got a hashtag called Force the Vote.
Mhm.
And it's essentially saying that, hey, there's only like the Democrats only control the House by like 3 people. So
Mhm.
if you can get 15 progressive Democrats to say they're not going to vote for Pelosi
Mhm.
for Speaker of the House in the beginning of January, unless she brings Medicare for all as a vote to the floor of Congress,
Mhm.
then they can take over the party on
Mhm.
that particular thing. And that's his light bulb. He has made a
Mhm.
prioritization, and it's
That's right.
forced everybody to change around him. There's all this energy about it now.
That's right. He's figured out what matters. And what matters is what your priorities are, right? You don't get a lot of them. And figuring out what your priorities are is a function of understanding how you would know whether something is or is not important. And so if you understand what is or is not important, it isn't too hard to drop something in to the blender and see what comes out. right? If what's important is making change at a particular level, then you need to put a dollar in the machine that makes that change, right? So I don't know where to go from there.
So give me something in your life where you've worked this system. Give us a concrete existential example of Harry Max's life when you're like, okay, I see the field, I see this area that I want to do something in. I like, to me, it's a process of localizing. You start out with your 10,000 light bulbs. Can't look at them all. I'm going to look at this little section of them, and I'm going to keep going down. Like there's 20 different things I could focus on, but there's only one I've really got the energy to do anything on. Give me something in your life that you've gone through that process, localized it down to the priority and chosen correctly in your mind.
Sure. Well, I can, this is overly simplistic, but it's real for me. I can either write this book or I can go work at a great job. I can't do both of them. I've proven that. I've tried it. So uh, if I want to have a job in the future that I love, I have to finish this book for multiple reasons. And, you know, unfortunately, we've all lost Tony Hsieh, brilliant businessman, founder of Zappos recently, who I think rightly said, if you have more than three priorities, you have none. And what I've determined is if you have more than two, you have none. For me,
Mhm.
I've determined that for me, I need the creative space and the time to do all of the things I'm going to do that rotate around the book. But that the thing that's in the number one slot, push or come shove, whatever, I can't even think in comprehensible terms about what that actual phrase is right now, uh, is that if I'm going to make a trade off between going and finding a fantastic new job, or if I'm going to get the book done, it's going to have to be the book. And one definition of a good option is it creates more good options. And
That's nice. Yeah, that's a nice actionable piece of intellectual plank to walk, right?
sure. And so if I, let's say I follow up on this job opportunity that I have at Apple, or this other job opportunity that I have with HP, or this other job opportunity that I have with the federal government right now. Let's say I pursue any of those. Um, what I know is that each of those jobs is a logical extension of my career in a slightly different uh, direction. All of them pay more than enough for me to live my life in a comfortable way. All of them meet my basic criteria for I don't want to travel a lot and I don't want to be in a situation that's dangerous. There's just a bunch of stuff that matters to me about the quality of my life day to day. And I could probably maybe squeeze the book out, but I'm guessing it would be another 4 years. So I have to choose between the book and the job. But what I do know is that none of those jobs create more good choices for me. They create good choices for me now, but they don't create more good choices for me in the future. So I'm judging the options they create now versus the options they create in the future. Now, I can't see, obviously, the cone of uncertainty gets wider every day you
Mhm.
step into the future. So I can't really tell you what those would actually turn into. I have no idea. I can speculate and maybe play out some scenarios in my head. But what I do know, and this is more a function of the conviction that I have about the work that I'm doing on the book on prioritization, is that if I finish that book, which I intend to do, it will create more good choices for me now and in the future than if I were to go ahead and choose to take the money. So for me, that is a very tough decision. It's based on a set of options that I have, of four options in front of me, three jobs and one book. I can't do a job and a book, according to me, because I need the creative space to be able to wake up in the middle of the night like I did last night and write stuff down and go back to bed at 8:30 in the morning and wake up at 10:15 like I did today. When you're working for somebody, they don't like that very
Yeah.
much,
Yeah.
right? I've been there. I've been on the receiving end of that. I've had people come into work at 10:30 and like it's hard, when they're supposed to be at a meeting at 9. And I've been on the delivery end of that, where I've showed up at 10:15 and my boss has said, I'd really appreciate if you were here at 7:30, like the rest of us working really hard. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I have these smart thoughts and I have to write them down. Then I get tired. And that's the gist of a decision like that.
So, you know, I was in this podcast, especially drag everything back to how this affects persuasion skills or persuasion strategies or plans. So, essentially, are you trying to do self persuasion here with this system?
You know,
It sure kind of sounds
a-
like it.
well, as you were asking that question, as you were formulating that question, I was thinking that exact thing. I was thinking this is in a way a form of self persuasion, but it's not. Maybe you know how there's that phrase like the best liars lie to themselves, or something
I've
like
never
that.
heard it,
Like,
but I like it.
well, yeah, the gist is that you can't lie to somebody successfully unless you can successfully lie to yourself. Or like the best liars figure out how to convince themselves, and then they can convince other people. I mean, in some ways, it's true for this kind of thing too. And it's not about lying, but it is a form of self-deception. It's a form of self-persuasion. It's a form of persuading myself to continue following something I believe in, and then with that conviction and with that rhetoric, being able to express these ideas to other people around me, in effect, walking the talk.
Yeah, I've, developed a lot of kind of internal dials, my own little persuasion dials, my own little tools for this. So yours to me sounds like my binary of utopian, dystopian,
Mhm.
that your book has a much stronger utopian value. Like you finish that book, it opens up new doors, new opportunities that you're not sure what they are exactly, but they would be good. And it's got a utopian flavor to that project. The other
Mhm.
ones you've done, you
Mhm.
doubt they're going to take you to utopia.
Mhm.
They'll continue your life, like you said, they have value, but it's going to take you to neutropia, I guess.
Yeah.
Neutrexia.
Uh-huh.
It's not gonna be dystopian. You wouldn't be, you know, probably horrified and unhappy every day in these jobs,
No.
but it's not going to feed your soul in a new way.
Yeah, but I think there's a subtlety to it that's maybe best expressed in terms of smoking, right? Smoking's great right now for some people, right? It's what it does to you over time that kills you, right? And jobs are like that. They can be, right? A good career is not like that. And but there are jobs that look real good today, and they may be fine for a while, but if they turn into an addiction and you continue pursuing the money at the expense of what you need in your life, you may end up in a place where it's quite dystopian. It's just not dystopian now, and it didn't look that way when you made the decision.
Yeah, and that's part of the problem, right? You're always persuading, like you said, against the future, which is uncertain. You're going to have to do logic infused leaps of faith or leaps of guessing, and
Mhm.
to me, like a lot of the stuff I hear you design, that's sometimes the way I would look at it, that you infuse as much logical thought into something as possible. Like when you opened this podcast today, there was a lot of logical thought that you laid out,
Yeah.
you know, and it's very well organized and you can almost see it visually about
Hmm.
how you would do this. And I've seen some of your previous work on, how to define a problem versus a
Hmm.
quagmire and
Hmm.
that stuff. And it's all very visual and very step by step.
Hmm.
So it has a really nice logic quality to it. But when you're talking about something like this too, there's, what part play does it play where you get to the point where, I can lay all this stuff out, but intuitively, it sounds like you're still intuitively at some point making this decision towards the book.
Well, I love that you're asking that question because I've been pondering this for the last couple of days. Because the fundamental, like the fundamental motivating energy behind a priority is your conviction about it, right? And I was trying to figure out how do you express what a conviction is? And I'm like, well, that's easy. It's what you'd go to jail over, right?
Yeah,
That's
that's
like
the word.
that's your conviction. So if you have a conviction about something, and it necessarily has to translate into what's most important to you. And what's most important to you has to translate into what you're willing to quote go to jail for. And that's how you know what your priorities are. And that's how you know what your options are from which you can make choices and decisions and ultimately get the results, hopefully, that you're looking for.
Yeah, when you come back to one of your original premises in here about alternative facts versus facts, you also have alternative or misguided convictions and well-guided convictions,
Mhm,
right? I work in this world a lot now when I do conversion talk with the right. They have very strong convictions that are very misguided
mhm.
according to my systems of logic and ethical persuasion and ethical outcomes and things like that. So I I I always have the you have the problem of going back in and trying to reset their logic grid
Mhm.
so that they have well-guided convictions versus seeing people make really misguided convictions, which are still convictions just as strong. And like you with the book decision,
Mhm.
right? That could become a persuasion opportunity for somebody, like to, you know, they're convinced that's a bad conviction for you.
Yeah, and I've had that happen.
I'm sure you have. So how does that work out? Like what have people tried to do to try, to try to go into that conviction?
Well, I have some very well-meaning friends and family who arguably are significantly more conservative than I am and very financially well off, uh, continue to push me down a path with love that they believe is a better long-term, more stable future for me. And I know that as a self-labeled artist, in effect, uh, even though I'm a business person and I'm intellectually oriented, at the level of my identity, I've gotten clear enough about the fact that I see myself more as an artist than as any of those other things, that I have to pursue what I believe allows me to stay in integrity as an artist. And so where that dividing line between my convictions and their convictions diverges is where my convictions affect other people's lives. And my conviction around writing this book is about the fact that the choices I'm making today are not adversely affecting anybody's life directly. And potentially the outcome related to the work and the choices that I'm making will have a lot of positive impact on people's lives. So to me, y- it this notion of convictions gets murky when it starts to affect other people. And it's a little bit like, I don't want nuclear power in my backyard, or I don't want somebody smoking if I have to breathe their cigarette um, uh, smoke or whatever. It's like my rights end where their breath picks up or whatever, right? And so in this particular regard, I'm allowed to persuade myself of anything so long as the uh, implications of those decisions remain largely in my world. Now, if I end up destitute and they end up having to support me, well, that's then their choice. Uh, those will have been choices I made for myself. But I don't believe that that's going to happen.
So, listening to you, like, so basically, you laid out business person, intellectual, and artist, uh, and you made an identity prioritization.
I
Like,
did.
that's an identity conviction.
Mhm.
Like, you're aware you have three facets here to your identity that you
I
could
do. Yep.
choose, and so the one that you've chose becomes the part of the nuclear warhead, you know, that you're going to drive everything towards. Like, I can use that as my prioritization.
Yeah. And I think that's largely because I have a philosophy for myself, which basically says live a life free of regret. And there are two ways of doing that. One, be a sociopath. The other, make choices that don't allow me to walk face first into situations that I'm going to regret. And I happen to know for myself over many years that when I have made choices that have been counter to taking a strong, for lack of a better term, artistic commitment to things that I know need to be in the world, need in double quotes, air quotes, uh, I've regretted that before.
Well, and I
And
think that's super strong. Like I have an area in the course where I talk about identity as persuasion
mhm,
and how strong that is, that people don't really think about the fact that they get to construct their identity. Like it always feels like it's given, by nature,
mhm,
but it's clearly, manipulated by you and by other people throughout your life.
mhm,
And so that idea that you have four, what I would consider to be like four quadrants there about, intellectual, business person, artist, or maybe, somebody who needs money, who needs to
mhm,
take care of life and things like that.
mhm,
Um, Even if you laid that out for people, like as, hey, here's four quadrants that almost everybody has, which one are you going to persuade into? Like right now, I would not want to be persuading into your other quadrants.
mhm,
I would want to be like, okay, he's told me that he's using artist as his persuasion, his strongest quadrant. He's prioritizing that. So if I were to go into one of the other three, I'm going to be fighting you to
mhm.
get you to shift your identity somewhere else. And people hate to shift their identity once they've got a conviction, you know?
That's right.
So I would want to land in there and be like, okay, how do I help you maximize that, Harry?
Literally.
How do I? That's right. How do I help Harry Max maximize your artistic um, goal here? Like what?
Well,
Like the book, for example.
sure. Well, I think the line of persuasion would be around, the opportunity cost of not doing the other artistic things I have, identifying what they are or what they could be. It would be looking at things I've set aside in favor of them, which might be more predictably lucrative.
But
But
this is
there's
not
a
a money
whole
play right now, right? This is an artistic play.
That's right. And I know because I'm careful about how I file my ideas and because I tend to invent a lot of stuff that I probably have, I'm guessing somewhere between 3 and 20 decent business ideas right now. And given my background, I've demonstrated historically that these are not flights of fancy. They are, when I deem something as a legitimate business idea, it may not be a big business idea. It may be more of a small lifestyle business, but it's probably not just a random hallucination about being able to make something
Right.
and
It's going to have
put
some
it out.
value. So you've
It's going
got,
to have some
when you go into your
transferable
business
value.
identity, you're like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, I've got value there. I can make things happen there. I can get
Yeah.
towards
I can
utopia.
I can create it for all of those ideas. I know I can create that value, and I know that once it is created, I can capture or recover that value in the form of dollars and cents. And so, a line of persuasion uh, around me as an artist versus the book would be around the other things that might be more straightforward in terms of monetization, easier to create, more predictable to market, more straightforward to monetize, and simply require thoughtful execution. I have those ideas today, and I have set them aside in favor of this particular work for reasons having to do with two things: the intersection between market signal, market demand, and my interests, which is those other ideas that I have are interesting, but they are not at the apex of my interest. And I have seen clear demand signal. When I was out giving talks on problem framing and diagnostic thinking based on the TED talk that I gave called The Problem Is Not a Problem, I would give the hour-long version of that talk. And in the end of that talk, I would touch on some of the work that I had done on prioritization. And while I was fantastically interested in problem framing and creative problem solving and diagnostic thinking, it seemed like nobody else gave a shit. And all the hands went up in the last 5 or so minutes of the talk when I touched on the max prioritization framework that I developed, the work that I had done at Rackspace as an executive and leading organizational prioritization, the work that I'd done at All Clear ID, leading organizational prioritization there. That's where people really wanted answers. And as I started answering those things, I realized, wow, there's a lot, people are hungry for some clarity around how to get better individually, how to work more effectively and efficiently on teams, and how to participate in an organization such that there's better alignment and better synchronization between what's going on at the top and what's going on the front lines.
Well, you dropped into one of the things that I've been doing business now, I guess, for 5 years, and coming at it from my background of it's we're both intellectual, so we both chop things into smaller pieces, separate them so we can see it and we can
Mhm,
kind of explain how it all works together, hopefully, once we understand each of the cogs. But I've run into this decision freeze, the decision challenge,
mhm,
um, decision dysfunction, I would call it. It's rampant in business.
mhm,
Like decisions, that little process of making, like prioritization and conviction and choosing is, it freezes things. It locks them up because you're at the juncture between failure and success. You're at the juncture between knowledge and guessing. You're at all sorts of political junctures there. And people don't have any type of sophisticated equipment to make decisions. That's what I keep finding. They don't even have a
mhm.
system.
Right.
It's either one guy has enough power and eventually he's just going to make it,
Mhm,
or people try to go to sort of a faux democracy of
mhm.
let's just be everybody supports, but they don't have a system for making clean decisions. And it turns out there are 5,000 decisions in every single thing you have to do.
Mhm,
So that decision load destroys people.
mhm.
And in order to get out of that dissonance, out of decision dissonance, they just start making fast decisions.
Right. And that's because there's a correlation between the speed of decision making and error correction and being able to get to a better place by making more decisions in a given time frame. But I will tell you that one of the reasons prioritization is so important is if you can make if you have fewer options and they are force ranked and you know which one's more important, which ones are better and why, you can choose not the top one, right? You can choose the one that's toward the bottom if you're making an explicit decision. But when you're dealing with 5,000 of them and you haven't gone through the process to figure out which one's on top and which one's on bottom, it's overwhelming. It's a fire hose of decision making. And, every decision you make at that point becomes you know, a random bet in the face of uncertainty.
Yeah. And I'll pull this back again to politics because it's the same process essentially. There's so much going on in politics right now. There's so much going on in social issues. There's so much going on in cultural issues that you're talking about people who have very little logic training to begin with. And now they're in a field of not only 5,000 decisions, but they're all coming from different worlds. You're getting poor information. It's all coming at hurricane speed. And so what they do is they just get overwhelmed and they pull out and they're like, give me a simple button, give me a simple decision. And I'm going to have my conviction on that. Like Democrats are bad. Liberals are bad. That's all they want. And they can't go back into that hurricane at all. So they do get prioritized. I would, again, call it a misguided priority. But
Yeah.
then they stop all that other stuff and it takes that load away, it takes that dissonance away, and you've now got them locked into a priority conviction.
Well, and the challenge here is that when you find other people with those same priorities, they become your community, and that community gets its own identity. It becomes a self-reinforcing loop.
Yeah, it's a super system. Like it's very simple to use. It can create communities. It can replicate itself. Even like this, is the genius of Catholicism, right? That why it became the world's religion is that it accepts anybody. You don't
Mhm.
have to know anything. It's rituals. All you have to do is show up every week and learn like how to say amen, and you're basically fine.
Yeah.
And so the simplicity of that is just awesome. And that kind of, when I look at the outcome of prioritization, it's not nearly as intellectualized as your system, but it's the same thing. They get to a priority conviction and they are just going to hold on to it.
Yeah. And that's been the challenge of this book, which is how to simplify all of this down and take it out of a full system of logic and turn it into something that really does communicate the passion and the emotion and the logic of what it means to understand that things are important and to be intentional about how you go about building your world so that you can get to the kind of world you want to live in rather than the kind of world we're in.
Yeah, and I think again for my stuff, when I hear you talk about this, it's yanking it down into what makes it actionable is yanking it down to context.
Hmm.
Like you're taking your abstract framework and mechanisms that you developed, but yanking them down into context. So when you
Hmm.
contexted yourself earlier about this is an identity issue for you, we have business, artistry, and intellectual, and money sitting there as a 4-point quadrant, and I'm now actionable. Like my persuasion for you, if I were designing persuasion for you, would be so much more effective right now because I've got a 4-quadrant system,
Hmm.
and I know that I can drop out. He doesn't really care about business anymore at this point. It's not as strong as artistry. He's
Hmm.
always going to be intellectual, but he doesn't want to just intellectualize this. He wants an
Hmm.
artistic product. You want this book to feel like, an artistic product. Because if it's
That's
just
right.
intellectual, you don't have to simplify it down to where it communicates, you
That's
know?
right. It is an expression. It is art for me. And once you know that, we're having a different conversation.
Yeah. It gives me, and again, it takes that hurricane and, moves it down to maybe, one cyclone, one tiny little cell inside that hurricane, and be like, okay, we're going to talk to Harry about artistry right now, and we're going to help him, realize that vision. And if I'm helping you, this is what I always try to teach people in persuasion. I never want to persuade against somebody's loves or their addictions, or their joys or pleasures. It's a losing proposition
Hmm.
to try to persuade against pleasure. You
Yeah.
will
And
clearly get a lot of pleasure out of this book, nailing it, having it artistic, having it what you always wanted it to be. So if I'm working in there, I want to help you do that. I want to be seen as an ally in that process.
I appreciate that. And I'm holding chapter 5, the current version, in my hand. And it's funny, this is right on topic. The chapter 5 is on team priorities. And the opening quote is, uh, it's better, as they say, as the saying, excuse me, it's better, as the saying goes, to be vaguely right than precisely wrong, which was from the book The Starfish and the Spider, right? That's it in a nutshell, right? The conversation we're having now about the book and about my work and about all of this, now we're now you and I are communicating.
Yeah, we've locked it down to something very workable. We've locked it down to I would call it again a context that people can talk in. There's enough here. Like we're now talking about Harry Max, talking about a 4-quadrant thing, and it's got an outcome of book. So we've shrunk it down to where it's now viable as a communication process.
Well, and when you're communicating, as you're communicating with me right now, I know that you're speaking to me, not some part of me that I've disavowed.
Yeah, which a lot of people do when they try to persuade. They want to persuade into what they want you to be because they've, made a decision about you, or at least a guess about what they think your dystopian turn is going to be.
Yeah.
But you've had this experience of trying to, when somebody's making a dystopian turn and you're trying to keep them from going down that road,
Hmm.
you know, then you start looking like, oh God, what else is there in their psyche that I can amplify and turn and use that to turn them back this way? I've worked with a lot of people on their creative projects over the years, and I have tons and tons of people who still pitch me like screenplays and movie ideas,
Hmm.
and as soon as I hear them, I'm like, okay, I'll pitch me, you know, you
Yeah.
know, and first of all, they very rarely have been trained how to pitch,
Hmm.
so they can't do that. And so
It's
I'll
art.
wait. Huh?
It's art.
Well, it is, and it's a trained art. It's something
it's
that you need to be
it's
trained how to do.
yeah.
And so, like, if you work in Hollywood and you make a living pitching stuff, you learn the process.
Yeah.
If you're just somebody who's like kind of interested and has an idea, then you don't have that skill to get your stuff, at
That's right.
least through the first process. So I'll listen to them and I'll help them form it up a little bit, but it's almost always a horrible idea.
Mhm.
99% of the time, there's
Mhm.
no value in the story. Like it would
Yeah.
not work. At that point, I've got a persuasion decision as a persuader. Do I let them continue down this path,
Mhm.
which I know is going to end futilely and they're going to waste money and time and effort and everything else? Or do I stop them and say, somewhere in the middle, like, hey, if you do it this way, like there may be some other ways of doing it? Or do I pull it all the way over to the other side and be like, hey, and I used to do this with people, especially in comedy, would be like, I understand your impulse. This isn't going to work. If you pay me to coach you, I will take you to something that will work
Mhm.
because this is what I do.
Mhm.
And I had a lot of people who, would say, sure, that sounds
Mhm.
good. And probably 70% of the people would drop out at some point because they couldn't make that turn.
Mhm.
But I at least knew what the turns were because I could quickly judge the possibility that they're going to be effective or not.
Yeah.
With your book, for example, like uh, I trust you because I know you're super smart, you're super experienced in this, you think about this a lot, you write on it a lot. I've been watching you write this for
Mhm.
4 years, you know. Um, so I have a lot of confidence that if you do get yourself set up correctly, you'll get to where you want to go,
Mhm.
you know?
Well, I appreciate that, and I have to say that this is now the fourth complete rewrite of the book. Painful. 60 some odd drafts, fourth complete rewrite, but it is only now that I'm settling the content and the logic into context. And so I am now starting to understand what you're talking about.
Well, you haven't been, again, sort of, in your background, you're not exactly trained as a book writer.
Mm. Well, but it's not like I haven't led technical writing teams, and it's not like I haven't led technical marketing communications teams, and it's not like I haven't written a gazillion highly persuasive emails, and it's not like haven't written books, but I have. I've done all of that. But taking this project and shaping it into something that accomplishes its business and artistic aims has been an epic journey.
Yeah, you're not talking about, I mean, you're talking about your criteria for your outcome has gone way up.
Mhm.
You're
Yeah.
building something here that you don't want, just to fire off and get half the ideas in there and then, that's good enough.
No,
You have a little bit of a, Michelangelo, Mona Lisa, you know, masterpiece need for this one.
guilty as charged. Yeah.
Can anybody persuade you off that?
I don't know. That's a fair question. Uh, I would be surprised if they could, because anything that would be capable of persuading me off this would be in service of this. So, for instance, if, name of potential employer I'm talking to right now were to say, look, instead of compensating you like this, we're going to put you on a 4-year contract and we're going to write the check for this number of millions of dollars. And you get it whether you do anything or not, like being a tenured professor, right? You just need to show up. I've had situations like that. Haven't earned that kind of money, but I've had situations where I've had jobs that I haven't had to do anything other than show up and be smart. And but if somebody were to come to me and say, we would pay you this many millions of dollars for these many years, I would scratch my head and I would think, yeah, that's a pretty good idea, depending on the company, right? Or the organization. And then I would think to myself, yeah, and that would be exactly the kind of freedom that I would need in order to write this book. Done. Right. Now, if somebody were to come to me and say, I'd like to pay you that amount of money not to write this book, I would probably turn it down. Right.
Yeah, interesting. So you're still moving through these quadrants. Like if they increase the value of the money or the business offer, then you could still get, now you got a three-way payoff, right? You still do your book, give business value, and get money, up front for it. Then now you're satisfying three quadrants without losing the most important quadrant.
Well, I'm laughing here because they've actually satisfied a criterion that you and I've never talked about, which is my favorite business strategy, which is aptly summed up is have your cake and eat it too.
Mhm. Sure.
You can do that. If you can get a have your cake and eat it too strategy implemented, you're winning.
Yeah, I've had this argument in academics before that, I wrote a 345-page dissertation eventually and rewrote it 3 times, and they rejected it for 4 years and finally, accepted it because I wasn't going to change it anymore. And I told them at the end of that, I'm like, 30 years from now or whatever, nobody's going to have read this thing, like all dissertations. If I had said one really super scintillating, interesting, culture changing, you know, uh, academic area evolving statement,
Mhm.
it'd have 100 times more value than this. If I just wrote it down on a piece of paper, then that'd have
Yeah.
100 times more value. Why isn't that better than your dissertation?
Mhm.
Why did I have to do all this to make it look like something, and it ultimately kills its value, as opposed to that one intellectual ingot that just changes everything?
Yeah. And I think that's what the publisher, this is Rosenfeld Media, uh, the publisher Lou Rosenfeld has been pushing me so hard to do, which is turn this into a short book. Like make it no more than 175 pages because he's looking for 8 ingots.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's consumption intellectualism right now too. It's
Yeah.
consumption knowledge market. That's how people want to read. They want your super value. They want that super idea, and they can use it, but they can't go down all the paths with you to get there.
Yeah. Yeah. He's amazing. I'm really fortunate to be able to work with him.
That's cool. Yeah, I think when you lock something in, like, we've talked about your projects a lot. With you have all this impetus, all this motivation to get it somewhere, and all this knowledge, and now, I mean, it's literally sitting in front of you as a communication challenge.
Yes.
That's you're just sitting here like in a fort with all this great weaponry and everything in there, and you're like, if I could just get that onto the battlefield, I could end this war.
Totally. I mean, it's mind-boggling to see it starting to come into shape and to think, wow, the fear that I had of putting a book forward that had stories in it, because I hate reading books that are chock full of stories and too long, is starting to give way to, wow, if I can do that story in 2 paragraphs and make the point and have people engaged in the process, and oh, I've left room for a picture. Isn't that sweet? Then I can package up this material in a way that when somebody reads it, they're gonna be the better for it.
Yeah, that kind of haiku challenge,
Yeah.
of boiling, and again, it's a certain brain that does that really well. I notice this a lot on writing staffs in Hollywood, that it's a collection of different types of brains. They're all working on the same product, but you're sitting there and one guy never says anything, and then an hour into the meeting he goes da na 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 na, and that solves everything.
Yeah. Right.
And
And
they
for
call
me,
the difference
it's
between Gatling guns and comedy writing. They're Gatling guns who just won't shut up, and they just constantly pitch, and they have ideas and they say them. And 90% of them are terrible, maybe 10% are great. And
yeah.
then grenade throwers who don't
Hmm.
say anything until they throw a grenade in the middle of the room that just like, oh yeah, that's it. We're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
Cool.
highly
Anything
valuable.
else?
Oh, there's always stuff, but I think that's a good hour of, Harry Max's approach to prioritization. Again, it can blend very nicely in with my persuasion stuff,
Mhm.
because I make this point to people a lot also when I do persuasion training, is that you can't, you're persuading against sometimes 50 years of somebody's life. Like if
Mhm.
I'm trying to persuade somebody out of a religion, for example, that they've been in for since they were born,
Mhm.
uh, there's thousands of reasons why they believe in that, and I have to go in. I describe it sometimes like the way the Allies approached the end of World War II in the Pacific Theater.
Mhm.
They decided to go in and just take a bunch of islands, so they got close enough to attack Japan from one of those
Mhm.
islands, but they had to take each island.
Yeah.
And so in persuasion, a lot of it is, I need to see all your islands.
Mhm.
and I need to go after one at a time, very
Yeah.
specifically. Because if I just try to attack everything, I don't have the forces, I can't get anywhere. If I
Yeah.
pick off one island at a time, which is like your prioritization thing,
Mhm.
I get where I need to go, at some point.
Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of Thomas Kuhn's book, Structure of Scientific Revolutions,
Hmm.
which is that there are revolutions in science when the exceptions to the current paradigm start causing so much internal angst in the people that hold those beliefs that they finally start creating cracks in the foundation for the new paradigm to take hold. Those are islands.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, I always value talking to you because you break things out into all the islands.
Mhm.
I can see them all,
Yeah.
and you're building a way to get through, to be like, hey, which island do you attack first? Which one's going to be the most important ones? And fascinating process. So I appreciate it very much. Um, Again, everybody says Harry Max, VP of the universe and specific businesses. What's the name of your book again?
It's called Priorities Beyond Getting Stuff Done. And Dan, thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. I always enjoy our conversations, and the focus of this one has just been sort of rejuvenating.
Cool. Well, we'll visit again, Harry.
All right. Thanks so much.
All right. See you, buddy.
Take care.